Koe o materu, soha hio e jatse, anyo nye ai tarai. Ne dero me de Wendat a jatu tan. Ne a quatras a yomen de a koyehti. Ne Wendat, Oklahoma. In Dare. My traditional name is Sohahio. My regular name, Richard Zane Smith. And I'm the Bear Clan from Wendat, Oklahoma. From the eastern.
50 years with clay.
50?
50 years with clay. And as a full-time artist, 38 years full-time. It started in high school. And, to take some art classes. I could go into a room and just really let my own creative sparks fly. And the teachers were so good. I had a ceramics teacher who got me started, Carol Ray, and still relate to her and say how important she was in helping me really discover clay. I didn't do this. I didn't do any hand build. You had to do some coil work first, and slab work, but then I kept watching the kids on the potter's wheel, it's like, that's what I want to do, that's what I want to do. So eventually I got the assignments, the coil built assignments, and I got to work on the wheel, and I loved it. And I was addicted to that wheel for probably 4 or 5 years. Yeah, I went to a community college, Merrimack Community College, and outside of St. Louis. That was really great. But it was there I really got serious about learning just techniques. I didn't really want an art education with ceramics. I wanted to know everything I could do with clay. And the teacher at the time, Bob Allen, he was all about that. So there it was, just learning how to throw. Throwing a lot, filling kilns. And then after 2 years, got the associate's degree, and I went on to Kansas City Art Institute for actually building a more of a traditional cooking pot. I start with a slab. Yeah, first it's just taking the clay, and it's been worked and wedged and already, so I don't have to do that, but basically just patting it out like a tortilla. Try to keep it as round as possible, because otherwise you'll have some going long and some going short. Now I've had some Mohawks come out, a couple of times now, and we've done some work together, and they really respond to this technique because it does have our story of the creation in there about the earth being spread on the back of the turtle. We have in the Wendat stories, it's a toad, the little toad who actually brings up the earth and makes her sacrifice, dies by bringing the soil up from under the water, and the woman takes the little bit of earth that's in the toad's mouth, and she puts it on the back of the turtle, and she starts to dance, and she starts spreading the earth with her feet round and round, and so it becomes like the first dance on Turtle Island. And that's why, for us, we start all our ceremonies with a woman's dance. And it's always good to check to make sure it's not sticking. Oh, this is covered with wood ash mixed with clay. So it keeps the pot from sticking. Yeah. So this is pretty much how I start, right? Is to roll corn, and you get these patterns, and I mean, it could have been used as a way to stretch the clay a little, possibly, but I think it had something to do with corn as being such an amazing food, for our ancestors, it solves so many problems having that, you know, that food that you could store in the winter, you know, and so corn has always been really special. Daneha, we say in Wendat, Daneha. And it's just, it shows up in songs, it shows up so much. I mean, even a lot of the ceremonial songs start with a song about the corn. After taking it off the form, I took my fingers and I just kind of pinched it in like this. And what I want to do here is make this edge really thin. But for the most part, they're layered. You know, they're put on in diagonals, which makes a much better bond. So this is my method of teaching a lot of these ancient traditional type round bottom pieces. Another thing is learning to always keep the form tilted inward. Even if I was going to build really big and just keep going with this, always keep that edge pointed inward. Because once the piece goes out like this, it's really hard to bring it back in. So now that it's thin on the edge, I'll roll a coil. Before I do that, I think I'm going to smooth the inside. So I always tell the students, it's like, pretend you're in a drought and water is so sacred, you know. You just, should I drink it or should I add it to the clay? It's something so precious. That's one of the very first things after, in our Thanksgiving address, you know, we mention the water. Right after Mother Earth, the second thing we mention is the waters that come up from the grounds in springs, and that flow to the rivers and the lakes, you know, and then back into the clouds again. So that's, yeah, it is considered a real sacred gift. Just something, can't have life without it. Makes this planet so amazing. So now what I'm going to do, I'll use this, my sacred water here. Just take a little bit. I put a little bit of water right under this edge here, because this is where I'm going to add the coil. So, and you know, as a given rule of thumb, the clay that you're adding should be softer than what you're adding it to. So this clay is a little stiff, so I'm going to soften it up a little. That way it's more likely that you're not going to distort the form below if this is soft and that's firm. I'll actually have two bits of clay, the clay that I use for the base and the clay that I use for coiling. That's really the ideal. And when you can feel the edge of the pot and it still gives, you can, and the piece feels firm, that's when you can start thinking about adding a coil to it. So when I add the coil, I'm standing and I'm adding it right below me, right this way. So it's a lot of it's by feel. And what I'm doing is I'm just pinching it on right below here. I'm making sure it's really attached well. And when it comes around, I want it to overlap. So there's a diagonal, kind of a diagonal joint. Instead of coming together like that, you know, which can be a weak spot. That's a place where it could crack later on. Now that I know this is pretty well attached, what I'm going to do is I'll take a little more water and I'll put it right down in this seam. Because this is stiffer clay, this is soft clay, so what you want is a little bond between them. So you want water to go down in there. Not lots, but just to fill the gap. Okay, so I'll let that sort of sit a bit and I'll just work on the inside. So what I'm doing on the inside is I'm taking my fingers and sort of smoothing it downward. Okay, so that's pretty good. Now, taking that little thin edge that I left and smoothing it into the coil I just added. That makes a bond. So now, what I'm starting to do is just pinch it a little harder down low, stretching it upward just a bit. Just go around and around. A lot of this is by feel, you know, it's just, yeah, knowing how much pressure to put on it. To prepare the surface to add a coil, what I do is I'll pinch the edge of the below piece, the pot that's already standing, the one that's dried a bit. Pinch it till there's like a bevel shape right on that edge, as thin as it can be. And you put your coil right under the lip of the piece on the inside. Now when you squeeze it and attach it, it's going to roll up a bit. That's okay. And I'm just moving very slowly and intentionally and as evenly as possible until the coil goes completely around. When you get to the outside and you start working it, you're going to want to smooth it upwards. So what you end up with is a diagonal coil joint. This is the opposite of doing like a log cabin stacking of coils like logs. You don't want that. But the adding is pretty much the same. What's going to happen eventually, you're going to change direction. So it's going to start, you want it to go inward, and just at where you want to start forming a neck, you just want to slightly, you know, just kind of coax it upward. So the next coil will be straight up. It's easy to take clay that's too tight inside where you have a constricted neck and make it wider. It's easier to do that. But if it opens up too wide and you want to push it in, it's going to be much harder to control it then. So it's just better as a principle to go inward with it more. So for cooking pots, you know, you want it to be open enough too that it's easy to take care of the soup and see everything that's cooking inside. But for Wendat pots, most of them are, you know, they have that little belly that sticks out, and that kind of is handy because it kind of keeps the other pots from bumping into rims, you know, so the bellies can bump each other, and that's all right. Get a little belly bump in the fire, but you don't want your rims clanging into each other. So I'm going to put the coil right about here, and then when I squeeze it up, of course it's going to grow a little more too. Now joining some clay on the outside here, you want the two clays really well together, so here's where I do pay a little extra attention to make sure there's plenty of slip on that. Because when you squeeze them together, you want that to vanish, you know. Let's see. When you add it, do it the same way where you kind of feed it in. When you're flattening it, you know, the coil's stretching while you're doing this. What I'm going to do here, because the edge is still really thin, is I'm going to add a small coil to thicken that up, and that'll give me a little bit of more of a lip too. So. See what I mean about you have to have a peaceful state to pull long lines like that. There's got to be some calm. Once they look a little dry and they're starting to turn gray a bit, then I build the fire. The pots are put around the fire and just kind of turned all day, really. I start a fire about 11 or 12 and pretty good sized fire, really. I place the pots kind of all around them. I usually try to keep them so they're all the rear ends of the pots are first, facing, and then after a while I'll flip them the other way so they're all, so I know, what stage each one's going through. Those pots need to ring before they're put in the fire. People who just say, well, I think they're dry, and just put them in the fire or build a fire on top of them. You can do that, but it's very risky because if there's any moisture at all, pop. So you just keep turning them all day, adding to the fire, trying to build up a good bed of coals. And then just as the sun is starting to go down, that's when I start thumping them. Bing, bing, see if they have a good sound to them, if they have a nice bell sound. If they do, they almost sound like they're bisque fired, then they're ready. And then I put slabs of clay down right over the coals. And those slabs have been preheated too. And then that's when you take the pots and you just turn them upside down, put them, right on those slabs. Start put sticks around the perimeter. flame up, just like rings of fire. It's so cool. It does look like a fiery bird nest. I'm just kind of keeping that fire going. And then we start moving it closer and closer. That's when you just start putting wood all around. And I usually put bark on top the pots. Well, and then just kind of go, I think they're all really glowing. Everything I see in there is glowing. And they're done. Then we have a choice. We can leave them in all night, or we can take them out while they're hot and put them in pine needles, and that way you kind of get some nice black interiors. But yeah, as far as creating the cooking pots, these pieces for cooking, I mean that's what most of them were probably made for. And, what it does is it's kind of like a way to touch base with your ancestors, because these were something that it was just a given of the day. This is what you cooked with. This is what you would smell in the mornings, food cooking in those pots, and you'd see that steam coming from those cooking pots every morning, and that's what kids would grow up with. And these pots will be used. They'll be feeding families. They'll be, exciting people that they're doing something that their ancestors did. They'll see it. Once they start cooking and they cook food in these things, and they see that stew boiling in there, memory starts waking up, and you just go, oh man, I think I've been here before.